scientists who serve on the Ministerial Advisory Council are urging government to release the information that was used to formulate the lockdown regulations. Professor Francois Venter has warned that if government is not transparent, the public could stop participating in measures to prevent the further spread of the virus. At the same time, unions are at loggerheads over the reopening of schools, with the Public Servants Association calling for a complete close down. To discuss these issues, we're joined now by Ruben Maleka, who's Assistant General Manager of the PSA, as well as Professor Francois Venter, who's head of the Ezinja Health Unit and Deputy Director of the Reproductive Health and HIV Institute at UCT. At WITS, I beg your pardon. So to the both of you, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the AM report. Prof, let me start with you. You know, there's perceptions that making this data public is likely to increase public buy-in, but there's also the potential unintended consequence of moving the public in the opposite direction. Why should people throw their weight behind this call?
I think that with public health in particular, you must realize we're not fighting a war against the foreign national. You know, this is a war against the virus that is tearing its way through the fault lines in our society. We need absolute buy-in from everyone, and for that to happen, we need to make sure that people understand why they're buying in. You know, it's public health has this basic tenet, which is transparency. You give people the science, you explain why they need to do something, and you kind of hope that they're going to take it on board. If you don't do that, people find it very easy to explain their way past stuff. So if you have patently absurd regulations, like we had with the churches, for instance, people just say, well, why should I wear masks then? You know, if government's going to be hypocritical about that, why should I believe them when, you know, they have regulations that I don't like? Now, some of those regulations I think are quite complex, and I think we need to give government its dues. It's not necessarily that easy always. It's not just a health decision. There's a whole societal, economic decision that's in there as well. But I don't understand why they can't be explained, why the thinking behind that can't be explained. And instead, in this country, rather than having that, reinforcing the social compact, why do we need to social distance? Why do we need to physical distance? Explain why the masks are so important. Instead, we've contorted ourselves into a whole legal fight and tussle around the cigarette industry and the alcohol industry, and now more recently, you know, this debate around schools just demonstrates how little public trust there actually is in the whole thing.
So, Ruben, the Prof speaks about the social compact. I'm interested to find out how much you know as a union about what is actually motivating government's decision to keep schools opened. Do you feel that the state has been opened enough about the thinking behind that decision?
No, thank you. Where we stand, in fact, we find that there's not much of transparency in terms of what methodologies was used to open the schools. Because in the first place, before the June school reopening, we have made inputs to state why the school must remain closed. One of it that motivated us was that we know majority of the school, they lack water and sanitation. There's also competing of resources whereby the learners share textbooks and they also share desks in the schools. And with those kind of things that are happening, we realize that there is no possibility of majority of the schools to be able to observe the regulations such as social distancing and even provision of water and sanitation. We know majority of our schools, they still use mostly pit toilets. And we know that it is impossible to exercise hygiene in most of the schools given the nature of the toilets that they're having in the schools. So we are at a state of saying that we are in a war zone with the pandemic, and therefore we suggested at the time that the school must close as of June to at least end of August and reopen when this winter has passed and even the infection rate is a little bit slowed, and start the academic year from September going forward to ensure that we save lives of our kids and also of the communities and the teachers.
Yeah. While we speak about the different scenarios, Ruben, the state is also asking very important questions about whether or not teachers should be paid during that period. What's your response to that?
Look, I think that's a very, that question should not even arise. You know, when you talk about teachers are people that already, as I can assure you, teachers already, even before the pandemic, teachers has always been working, abnormal hours to ensure that they make sure that the learners catch up, because majority of the schools really, they don't have resources. And most of the teachers do work even Saturday and Sundays. And I'm confident that even after this pandemic is slowed down, the schools reopen, we are going to see teachers working day and night to ensure that they cover all the work that has been, has fallen back, and they are going to work weekends. They are going to work until such time that they ensure that the learners are ready and equipped to be able to pass their exams.
Yeah,
so if you are now going to...
Ruben, I hear that, but the question is still largely unanswered. If schools do remain closed, as you're suggesting, until September, should teachers be paid?
Teachers would definitely have to be paid, because when the school even are closed, teachers are not going to be sitting back. Remember, teachers at the same time, they carry a lot of work that is not being seen by anybody else. People are looking at teachers to be sitting only in class. When is the time to prepare all the lessons? When is the time to mark all the script? The teachers, that's the work that they do already when they are home. So teachers at any given time, teachers are not sitting back. Even when we call the school closure, teachers will still continue to be in contact with the learners. Teachers will still be preparing for the lessons, and they know that when the school reopen, they should be ready to teach, and therefore teachers deserve their salaries.
Interesting. Prof, let's rope you back into the conversation. So there's also the very real prospect of the state government frustrating this process by releasing incredibly complex data that ordinary South Africans wouldn't be able to decode. How are we going to ensure that if the government does concede to this demand, it's going to be something meaningful for ordinary South Africans whose buy-in we need in order to get this right?
I've seen all the data. It's not that hard. I think you're underestimating like a lot of the advisories and a lot of the stuff that the Ministerial Advisory Committee and others have put together is actually quite stunningly boring and quite not terribly controversial. Some of it is quite complex, but that's just a messaging issue. You just need to explain some of the science, get it through. I think there's no better way to than to panic the public than to say, oh, we don't trust you with this information because it'll panic you. You know, we need to be able to explain these things. It's not that hard. And we also need external experts to be looking at it to say, are your assumptions right? We've got a very critical society in South Africa. We've had no problems in people, criticizing various decisions and unpacking the rationales. But I just think it's useful to hear from government what are the reasons for it. And particularly for the more difficult ones. There may be good reasons to put out a curfew. Why can't we hear those? Things where I find very difficult to understand, such as the cigarette ban, which is one, and then the packing of the taxis would obviously be another. But there are others which are just difficult, which require this entire society to have a debate about, and the schools certainly would be one of them. It's emotional, it's scary, it's shrouded in mystery. There's disagreement amongst the experts. The best way to do that is to actually explain why you're doing something and then allow that to be criticized. As I said, we're not fighting a war against another country here. We're fighting a war against a virus that is just able to find the smallest weakness in the society and tear its way through there.
Do we have examples in the world where a government has been forthcoming about some of the thinking behind regulations? The advantage, of course, is that the situation that we're facing in the country isn't overly unique. And so I'm interested to find out whether there's been a country that's, I guess, gone down this path and what the effects have been.
Their advisories and talk about all their various regulations and that just put them out and put the explanations behind it. Governments are not, interestingly enough, some of these government agencies don't actually take up. So for instance, in the USA, they have the Centers for Disease Control. They put out guidelines and Donald Trump says, I don't agree with them and I'm going to do something different. There's no binding on the government. Nobody's debating the fact that the South African government might decide, hey, we don't agree with it, but I think we can ask what are those reasons for that, so that we can just see what the thinking is. There are going to be, no one's going to get this right. We are in unprecedented times, but not seeing the reasoning behind it, and then not seeing the reasoning behind, say, changing a decision. We've seen plenty of decisions reversed, then put back in place, then put back, and then reversed again. So just hearing those things would reassure us, but also allow us as a society, as a grown-up society, to say, do we agree with that, and are we willing to let that one go, or is this one that we need to really have another discussion about?
Speaking about precedent, Ruben, part of what the Basic Education Minister, we understand, according to some reports, is concerned about is the precedent that this would set if schools are closed on the basis that teachers are worried to contract the virus. We know that teachers are among many frontline workers in this pandemic, and there are very real fears that if government does concede to this, other frontline workers will come forward, putting, I guess, to the table the very same reasons why they should be allowed to stay at home. How do you respond to that?
Look, the fact is that it is not the first time that the frontline workers like nurses, doctors, and teachers, they've been carrying this country since the lockdown from the 26th of March, and the schools only reopened in June. So that is not going to be something that can arise now to say that teachers therefore are going home, or therefore all frontline workers are going to do the same thing. So our public servants are very clear. They understand why they should be carrying the country at this moment, and they know that in fact since the school reopened, they have been overwhelmed with a lot of infection rate that has been happening in the hospitals, which is something that is not being desired. So as we speak right now, the taxis are carrying 100% of commuters, and with the school coming to be closed, we believe that it will give more space for those that we really need, meaning the nurses, the correctional officials, to be able to at least be in taxis without these kids that are also committing to schools. So the infection rate will go down. Remember, when you talk about infection rate, we're talking about a situation whereby you would find that a parent is infected, and therefore the learner must go to school on her own or on his own. And the question is that, how do you deal with that kind of a situation? So the closure of the school for this period, remember, we're not calling for a permanent closure of the school. For this period up until end of September, when the infection rate has gone down and it's summer, the flus have gone down, then the school will go back and they will still be able to do and catch up and be able to make sure that they progress to other grades as of March 2021. What we're only asking right now is that there was a money spent of 600 million during the school reopening from June. We want to just call for transparency by the minister to come out to say and tell the public that how was that money being spent.
Where are you getting the figure from, Ruben? The 600 million. Sorry to interrupt you. Where are you getting that figure
from? The 600 million, it was pronounced during the school reopening that in the school reopening they will spend 600 million to do to make sure that there's provision of PPEs and water and sanitation in schools that they needed them. So as of now, we call upon the Honorable Minister to come forward and explain and tell us how, where, and when was the 600 million used, just to make sure, because we said at the time that we can't use that money temporarily just to open the schools, and we are not making a permanent solution to the basic education. Because if that money could have used for permanent solution at the time, we would have been knowing all the time that from today going forward, when you go to a public school that does not have water, that water is there and is permanent. But if it was used for temporary water and that money is finished, that's where the problem is. Okay. We want to know that what happened to the 600 million that was used for the school reopening.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much to the both of you for weighing in. Certainly appreciate your time and insights. Ruben Maleka is Assistant General Manager of the Public Servants Association, and Professor Francois Venter is the Deputy Executive Director at WITS's Reproductive Health and HIV Institute. To the both of you once again, thanks very much indeed.